Good afternoon, everybody. I'm out here working on the S10. I noticed originally when I put different tires on the front that I had a broken lug stud, and this particular one is stripped out because they put the wrong lug nut on there when they were in a hurry to put some wheels on this thing. I'm like, all right, that's cool. I'll just go ahead and pull the rotor off and beat some new studs into it and replace all that and get it all brand new and pretty. But after getting in here and looking at the thickness of the rotor, I mean, Christ, what are these, factory rotors or something? Nobody replaces anything anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing a complete front end brake job on this thing. New pads, new rotor. I'll check my caliper. I might go ahead and order lines because I'm not overly happy about the way that looks. And I do have a brake line that's leaking someplace, so I might end up having to replace all this crap in the front. But I'm going to start tearing it apart. And on these older S10s, it takes a hex head socket to get your brake caliper off. And as rusty as all this looks, it doesn't look like it's going to be a happy process. I got my brake pads off on the front driver's side of the truck. And as you can see, they're a little tore up, but if you're running a daily driver, I mean, this is still useful if you're going to not replace anything, but I think since I got broken wheel studs and I'm just going to redo everything in here, the back one is a little bit thin. That usually means that your slides are hung up, and these were extremely rusty. And easiest way to tell how much brake you got left, if you have the squealers on your vehicle, you can see that this is still sitting pretty fair amount up before it's going to come into contact and tell you that your brakes are going bad. But new rotors, new pads. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this rotor off of here and see what the bearings look like. If you're inspecting the brakes on your vehicle, usually you will find stamped someplace a minimum thickness. Now, the minimum thickness on this would be 24.5 millimeters. I just took my dial caliper to it, and it's coming in at 24.65, which means that this particular rotor is right on the edge of being at the minimum thickness. And as you can see here, yeah, it absolutely is. So, to me, it's time to replace it. When I pulled the bearings out, that is pretty much all the grease that was on the bearings, and to me that says somebody had this apart at one time, or who knows, it might be factory. You never know. People don't maintain things anymore. And while I have the rotor off, I also took a look around my backing plate. It's pretty good except for one little spot down there at the bottom. And I did notice that my spindle is stamped Chassis Tech, which to me says this is most likely an aftermarket drop kit, which, I mean, it might be okay. I don't like my trucks lowered, but I think this one sits at a tolerable level. So I got to look up and see who Chassis Tech exactly is. And up here in my caliper, which I'm hoping to reuse, had a lot of crap in the cup. So I need to clean all that out. I need to pull my bushings out of it. It's got little rubber O-rings back there that need to be cleaned. I will probably pick up new pin kits. And judging by the looks of that brake line, it's going to get brake lines too. And there's a little sample of what's fallen out of it so far. And while I'm in here, I will also look around the back and check my upper and lower ball joints. Sorry about my finger. Check my lower and upper ball joints. And I already have my tie rod ends to do on here, so that's all going to be part of the same deal. But I'll go look some parts up and see what I can get my hands on, and looks like I'm going to be spending money on Rock Auto again. Alright, so back to the 91 S10. Went ahead and ordered a bunch of parts for it, for the front brake setup. And it's going to be a couple days till the parts get in here, so that gives me a time to take everything apart and clean it up. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pulling this backing plate off of here, wire brushing it down, getting a coat of core seal on it. Same thing with the chassis tech spindles. I'm going to clean them up and get a coat of core seal on them while I'm waiting for parts. Alright, so I got in here with a wire brush and some acetone and clean the area up. I've got the front and the back side of the spindle with core seal on it, and I did a little bit of my upper control arm there. And I haven't really done anything with the lower. I know I'm eventually going to be pulling this thing apart, because as you can see, the springs are getting a little haggard, and eventually this truck is going to get a V8 swap, so there'll be new springs going in. I do have a new pair of shocks for it. So I'm just doing this as kind of a preventive maintenance. That way, if I have to be in here again, these are some parts that I won't have to deal with being rusted or completely contaminated with grease or oil or anything like that. I'm waiting on parts and just doing little things to pass the time. Hooray, the parts ferry finally came late last night. So I got my new parts here, and what you want to do is hold on to your old parts until you're completely done the job, and that way you can compare stuff. The calipers look identical. The brake shoes, brake pads match up, so that's good. I've got my bearing seals and brake hoses. And I've also got the rotors that came in last night. And I went ahead and verified their diameter with the old rotor. And I put one of my new lug nuts on here just to make sure that was all cool. So this thing is basically ready to assemble. And when you get a job like this and you're putting on a whole bunch of parts, save all your boxes and packing material and everything like that, just in case something goes wrong and you need to take it back, and make sure you hang on to them receipts. Another job I'm going to take care of while I'm in here, I am going to replace these old crusty shock absorbers that don't have any rubber at the bottom anymore. Shocks are easy. You take your two bolts out at the bottom. Hopefully your clips haven't broken. I got one broken on the other side that I got to go deal with, but you can take usually it's a 1/4 inch open end wrench, hold the top and draw your bolt up to remove your shock, and it will just fall out through the bottom lower A-arm once you get it out. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this with some PV blaster and start wrenching away on it. Sorry for the noise in the background, got the heater running, it's kind of cold today. So I got my new brake rotor up here, and what you want to do before you go greasing everything up, put your bearings in there and make sure they fit. They shouldn't be sitting up too high out of here. I'm also going to go ahead and check my seal to make sure that'll be a nice tight fit. So those two are good. And we will check the bearing for this side. That's also good. So we are ready to start smearing everything with grease. Because if you don't do this first and you pack your bearings in grease, the auto store gets a little upset unless you clean them out really, really good when you return them. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is going to take a clean rag, cleanish rag, and wipe out the bearing races on the new rotor. Because I know they do spray these things down with a preservative that keeps them from corroding. And I don't know how that would affect bearings or not, but clean is good. So, as you can see, I got the glovies. And we're going to pack some bearings. So you want to take a nice big dab of grease. Take your new bearing. Put it in your hand. And wipe it backwards towards you. And you want to slowly rotate the bearing while you're doing this. And what it's doing is it's putting grease into this opening here and pushing it up and putting it in the rollers, which is exactly where you want it. And you're going to go ahead and you're going to do the same thing for the other side of it, so that you have grease everywhere. And what I like to do is grab the inside race and kind of hold that still. A little hard to do with gloves on. Give the bearing a spin and let the grease get all inside of it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a little extra grease, not too much. I've seen people completely fill the insides of brake rotors up with grease, and there is such a thing as too much, because that's just going to be messy the next time you have to take it apart. So I like to coat everything real good. And this is the rear. So we go ahead and drop that down on in there. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the front. Put grease in your hands. Drag it back. Rotate. Drag it back. Rotate. So I do have some grease coming out the bigger end of the bearing. And once again, take this, put it in my hand, give it a spin, get some of that grease moving around. I'm going to do the same thing on this one. Put a little extra on the inside. Not too much, because you don't want dry bearings either. That kind of defeats the purpose. And this side's going to have to go in after I flip this assembly over, so I'm going to place it back on a clean piece of cardboard. And I am going to get these sticky mittens off. Hate wearing gloves. Hands always sweat. But now we have to put the seal in. And this is your seal. 99% of the time your open end will go in. But we want to take this seal and we want to put a little grease around it too, because it's got to ride against the hub, so you don't want to put it together dry, or you can pretty much screw your seal up right from the get-go. And I haven't cleaned my rotor yet, because I know I'm going to be touching it with my dirty hands quite a bit more by the time I get done. So I got a hammer. Just give it a little tap. Get it seated in there. Now this does get recessed in a little bit more. So what I'm taking is one of my old outer bearing races that I don't need because they were already put into these rotors. I take that in the rest of the way that it needs to go. And you'll kind of hear your tone change when you're doing this. See, it sounds more solid once it actually gets in there and seats. So this inside one is done. And I gotta go find a piece of Scotch-Brite so I can clean this inside surface. I got a piece of brand new Scotch Brite here. And I'm going to move this out of the way. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to lightly spray. And clean all the protective finish off of this rotor that it came from the manufacturer with. And the reason I do it this way rather than just dousing it down with 10 million cans of brake cleaner is I like to conserve brake cleaner because this crap ain't $4 a can no more unless you find it on sale. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this dry and set it back like that. And now that I got this part of it clean, I know I'm not going to be touching this particular surface anymore with my hands. So I'm going to let this dry, we'll flip it over and we'll put the other bearing into it. So while we're waiting for our rotor to dry, we're going to go ahead and prep our caliper. Now, these two bushings right here are slide bushings. And then this other end, there are O-rings for your pins to go into. I've already cleaned this one up so it slides in and out nice and easy. This other one's a little stuck. So what you should do before you put all this together is pop these out of here. And you're going to be giving them a little coat of lube. Now there's silicone lube that's made for doing brake work. I've always used Molly lube. Not a whole lot because you don't want this picking up dirt and causing issues. So you just go ahead and coat the outside of this very lightly. Then you take a little bit and you put it in on your O-ring. And you slide this in. As you can see now, it moves nice and easy. Same thing when I go to put the pins in. The pins will be wiped down, cleaned out, and I will put a light coat of lube just down here on the tip and a little tiny bit because the threads actually go through the bushings in the back, so you don't need to worry about lubing back here, but put a little bit on the tip. And once I get these two lightly lubed up, we can go ahead and load the pads into it, which is going to be the next step. So that's cool. Now on these particular pads, I've already gone and cleaned the surface of them up with brake cleaner. This particular set, you have your tension spring here that will hold it into the caliper. So you go ahead and just pop that in there. Being careful not to get your fingerprints all over your pads that you just cleaned. And sometimes they like to do that. Yeah. And on these kind of pads, you used to have a lot of complaints from people that they would hear a clicking noise or a chattering noise or something like that when they were moving slow. These particular pads are held in here by these two ears here, and this rests up against the top part of the caliper. I usually take these and bend these down a little bit so it has a tighter fit. And I've also already sprayed the back part of it with Disc Brake Quiet. So when you go to put these in before you modify them, they will shake all over the place. So you want to tighten that up before you even put your caliper in, and that'll eliminate some of the noise. And I got my new brake hose ready to go, and now I got to get you all set up on the other side of the truck and we can go ahead and put the rotor in. Alright, so we're over on this side of the truck and there's a spindle. I'm going to take and put a light coat of grease around this hub here. And then I'm going to take my outer bearing, get that in there. And I am going to grab a little bit more grease to put here around the outside. Now I am not going to douse the outside of this bearing in grease. Just going to put a decent amount on there so when it is running, the grease kind of runs itself in a little bit. And just so we have a tiny bit extra. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the washer, slide that on, and then my castle nut. Now I'm not going to tighten these up all the way until I get a wheel on there, because I usually set my bearings by having the wheel on there and letting it spin 1.5 times and seeing how it feels. But the rotor is on. It's quiet. I'm not hitting any of my dust shield because the dust shield on this side of the truck was really bent up and I had to beat the crap out of it with a hammer. So I'm going to grab my brake cleaner, clean this side of the rotor, and we are ready to put our caliper on. And I'm just going to give this a spray. And I'll wipe down with the Scotch-Brite. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and let this dry up for a second and I'll be ready to set the caliper. But since I don't have tie rods on it, I could just go ahead and turn it that way. That way I can see what I'm doing right in here. Yeah, this passenger side was a bit of a pain in the butt to get in there. So, that did not get filmed. And I'm going to put my slides in. Go ahead and tighten these down. And one thing you want to double check when you're doing your calipers is to make sure that your bleeder is on the top. Some brakes can be reversed, and it sucks to find that out later. So go ahead and tighten these down. Alright, so got that in. Want to still make sure that the rotor turns and nothing is jammed up. So that's looking good. I got to go get my brake hose. And there's a little cap underneath of here that is blocking off the passage where the brake hose goes. And I need to clean up my old banjo fitting bolt for the caliper. I don't know how good y'all can see this, but this is a hex on this side that goes into my bracket on the frame, but there's only 4 sides to the hex, and then it has a rounded off part, which goes down towards the bottom on this. So what I need to do is I need to put my brake line in, and I'm going to take the adjustable and spin it until I feel it go in to where it's supposed to go into. And of course it's going to be a pain in the butt because I'm trying to film it. Yep, so swoop goes down, which is basically the way I have it in here. It just wants to be stubborn and fight about everything. There we go, it just popped in. Then I'm going to take my clip, put my clip over top of it, and tap my clip into place. Now we're going to make sure that the brake line doesn't bind up on anything. It's clear of the coil spring, it's clear of the upper and lower A-arms. So this one is good. So now I just need to pivot my brake line back around and connect that in, and this side is pretty much wrapped up. I'm reusing the brake line on this side. What I did already was I went in here with a Scotch-Brite pad and some brake cleaner and just cleaned this end up here and wipe down my threads. So that way I know it's going to be all good when I go to screw it together. So now I got to get some fuel line wrenches and hook this back up. Alright, so I got this side all buttoned up. My hard brake line is connected and tight into my flex line. Flex line going into the caliper, that's tight. And on these new banjo copper washers that go on these things, I would suggest you tighten it up and then give it a couple taps with a hammer to compress the banjo washers a little bit, and then give it your final tighten. Everything on here has been lubed up. The rotor's clean. The caliper's clean. Everything still turns free. So now I got to hop over to the other side and repair a brake line that broke before, and I'll show you how to do that. Alright, so this is the brake line that I have to flare. And this is an ICOP line, by the way, because the one that was on the truck broke. So I needed to replace it, and ICOP is a excellent substitute. So what I've got here is I've got this brake tool. I think I picked it up off of Amazon. And what you do is you run it up into your line, and you take this piece here that's a stopper. So that tells you how deep you need to go with your brake line. So I am up against the stopper screwed all the way in. So then I could take my 10mm wrench and go ahead and tighten these bolts down to hold this in. And if you guys have never worked with NICOP before, compared to working with the old steel hard line that we used to have to deal with all the time, this stuff is like flaring butter. And this tool is nice as compared to a traditional flaring tool because you can get into a lot more tighter spaces than this. The only drawback to this particular one is only for 3/16 brake line. So if you needed one for 1/4, you would have to buy a different one, which I probably eventually will do anyway, because I do have some 1/4-inch lines on this particular truck. So now we're in tight. There we go. And we can go ahead and pull our stopper out. Now there's another piece to the tool, which is a little hard to see with the light off now, isn't it? Hey, there we go, we can see. If you'll look on this tool, it'll say OP1, Operation 1, which is the operation that puts the bell into it before it gets double flared. So we're going to go ahead and screw this in there. And you'll feel it stop because it just hit the line. Tighten that up. Now we take our wrench and we go ahead and we tighten this down. And you tighten it down all the way until the nut seats. And we are just about there. Okay. So that's operation number one. We put the bell into it. Now I can go ahead and take this back off. And you flip it around 180 degrees. And this gives you the second part of your operation, which is putting your flare, your double flare into it, because you never want a single flare brake lines. But this will be operation number 2. So I'll go ahead and screw that in. And make sure you always put your fitting on there before you do any flare work, because it really sucks to have to rebend an entire another piece of line because you forgot to put that on. Ask me how I know about that. Okay, so we're tight in there. And we're going to go ahead and draw this in. And that'll give me that nice double flare on the end that brake systems love and appreciate. Okay, so we seated. Sorry about my hands being in the way. We're all in some tight places here. So we can go ahead and take this out. Then I'll grab my 10mm wrench again and undo these. And since there's a double flare hiding in here now, I'm going to need to take these bolts out quite a bit to be able to allow that double flare to pass through and actually get it out. There we go. And pull you up with the tripod here. Focus. Yeah, so there's our double flare. We got our nut on there, and I've already went ahead and fit this into the brake lines. It's not the exact same nut that's on the other side, but it will do what I need it to do. So I'm going to go ahead and get this put in and tightened up. Okay, so I got my brake line in there and I got it all tightened up. And I made sure that I have a little bit of space between my frame and my brake line for if anything needs to vibrate, it's not hitting on anything. And I rebent this thing exactly the same way the factory one was. So if I ever need to get that bracket out, it's kind of jogged back and over, so it does that. The next thing I got to do is I got the new shock in this side. I got to go ahead and put my bolts back into the bottom of it. And I also need to connect my tie rod ends and get all that squared away. Alright, so we got the brakes all done and put back together on the S10. And me and Junior already went through and bled them. We decided not to clog the video up with the bleeding part. I mean, there's 50 million videos online about how to bleed brakes. But we got nice clean fluid flowing through everything. Unfortunately, the back brakes look like a train wreck, so I'm going to need to order some parts, but I'm just going to wrap that up with the front. And we'll be coming out with more videos on this truck, of course, but everything looks good in the brake system so far, so happy. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Like and subscribe.